Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning, and welcome to St. Bart's on this summer morning. Very glad you're here for our Sunday forum. My name is Meredith Ward. I'm the Associate Rector for Pastoral Care here at St. Bart's, and I am sitting in for our vicar, Peter Thompson, while he is away, and for Zach, who is also away. And it's my joy and delight to have you here on behalf of all of us. We're so glad you're with us. This morning, we are going to be hearing from some of our own folks. We've got Bailey Regan, Teagan Sage, and our own rector, the Right Reverend Dean Wolfe, who are going to be reflecting on their experiences at the 81st General Convention. All three of them were there in June in Louisville, Kentucky. There was a lot that happened this time around at the General Convention, and so we're going to hear from them and hear their reflections, a little bit about their own experiences, which are going to be a little different because Bailey and Regan participated in some of the young people's events. And of course, we have a bishop with us who was
participate in the young people's event,
but who was in the House of Bishops. So glad you're here, and I'm excited to get started and talk a little bit about. Maybe we could just sort of start with your general impressions. Had either, I know Dean has been to general conventions before, but I'm wondering, Bailey and Teagan, have you attended a general convention before?
This was my first general convention, and Teagan and I took part in what's called the Young Adult Festival. That was initiated in 2003 during the general convention in Minneapolis, and it's meant to be an opportunity for young Episcopalians to gather and learn about church governance, learn about what happens at general convention, but also just to spend time in fellowship, to break bread together and talk about our hopes for the future of the church. So my expectation was that I would enjoy the Young Adult Festival and meeting new folks and reconnecting with folks from the Diocese of Massachusetts and Central New York, and I certainly did that. And I think, altogether enjoyable time.
It was also my first time at a general convention. You know, I knew, I had a sense being here in New York that the Episcopal Church is kind of it's a small world. It's kind of a neighborhood denomination. You tend to run into people that you know everywhere, but that was doubly confirmed for me at general convention, where it felt like you couldn't stand at the bottom of an escalator without seeing about 20 people that you knew. And that was just such a delight. The community building that happens there, I think, is a crucial component of the charism of the Episcopal Church. But in particular, the Young Adult Festival, you know, it's a cross-section of young Episcopalians from around the country, a lot of whom aren't quite as fortunate necessarily as we are here in New York, where there's a very, very vibrant young adult ministry, and there's a lot of folks here who are deeply dedicated to their faith and who want to be in fellowship. So it was eye-opening to see just how life-giving that was for these folks to really be in communion with other people their age, with their peers, and to have some formation and exploration in that space.
Great. Dean, you were, this is not your first rodeo at General Convention. You were obviously participating in the House of Bishops, and this was a big convention. There was a lot that happened. Could you talk, first of all, just your general impressions, and was there anything different that happened this go-round from your experience in the past?
Well, I'm in my 20th year in the House of Bishops, and to see the transition in the composition of the House, the larger numbers of women, the larger numbers of people of color. It's a much more diverse house, and you notice it when we sing. It's just interesting to experience that difference. So that's one thing, and I'm realizing that a lot of the bishops that were my mentors and bishops I looked up to are no longer on the floor of the House. They're retired, and so there were times when I was looking for somebody to come to the mic who wasn't going to be coming. And there were some early silences, and I think people were wondering, well, why wouldn't we have more discussion on this issue? One bishop felt very comfortable coming to the mic, so much so that I think he won the Frequent Flyer Award for participation. We try to kind of internally monitor ourselves, and you only have so many times. There's an expectation that there's only so many times you'll speak on a given issue. But I think what was going on is early on, a lot of new bishops, and they're not used to speaking in parliamentary form, and they're not used to having a gallery behind them with members of the press. And so everything you're saying is for attribution, and that chilled some people's enthusiasm for going to the microphone on some topics.
There were a lot of resolutions being discussed, some passed, some didn't, and I want to get to those in a little bit. But one of the major things that happened this year is we elected a new presiding bishop. Bishop Curry has come to the end of his term. He's still our presiding bishop until November, at which point our new presiding bishop will take the reins. Can you talk a little bit about, first of all, how you experienced that, if you did experience that election process? And Dean, maybe you could speak a little bit to our new presiding bishop and. Yeah.
Well, it's a good thing that I don't put money on Episcopal elections, because I would lose. I could not tell you how surprised I was to see Sean Rowe be elected on the first ballot. However, a number of retired bishops had come to this convention and voted. So we had some 152, 53 votes, and normally we have about 130 active bishops. So that in some ways, I think, helped him reach a majority kind of right off the bat. But I thought Rob Wright, Bishop of Atlanta, would be either elected or at least running second. I was really proud of Scott Barker from Nebraska, who I have a lot of respect for, who came in, I think, second, and felt like he had beat the general wisdom by doing so well. Sean is a very experienced person in the structures of the Episcopal Church. He was a part of an early committee about reviewing the structure of the church. He has a PhD in organizational development, I think, or organizational management. So he'll be a very interesting person to watch as we do the really hard work. It's always easy to add on to an organization. What's really hard is to prune an organization and to cut back and to limit some of its wide sweep. I think there's a sense that we would do better if we did fewer things at a higher level of excellence. And I think Sean's going to lead us in that.
Well, we felt very fortunate to be at our first general convention and have it be an election year. That was just so exciting for everyone who was a part of the Young Adult Festival. We attended a lot of events through the Young Adult Festival, including the panel where the nominees introduced themselves more formally and answered some questions. It was actually, the way they set it up, they had a fishbowl with color-coded questions on various topics, and the nominees would come up one after another and draw a random question out and then have 2 minutes to speak on that topic. And, you really could get a sense of their ministry from just having to speak off the cuff. And they all impressed us. The Young Adult Festival actually had our own election, and funnily enough, we elected Sean Rowe. Not on the first ballot, yeah, it was the third ballot, but still. It was just so much fun to be there for the whole procedure of all of that, because I don't know how much you guys know about the presiding bishop election, but it carries a lot of the same sort of traditional and procedural characteristics that maybe an Episcopal liturgical service might, where the House of Bishops deliberate and they make a decision, they come to a decision, and they actually send someone with like a note to go from where the House of Bishops are sort of locked away to the House of Deputies to deliver said note. And then they deliberate and see if they're going to confirm the election, and they send someone back. And this entire time, the bishops, and I'm sure you can speak to this, Dean, are sort of locked away there. Who knows how long it'll take? And then finally, if it's approved and everything is squared away, all the bishops walk back to the House of Deputies with the newly elected presiding bishop, who then immediately addresses the entire congregation. And so that's kind of the first time you get to see the presiding bishop-elect in this new role. And, this year was a little interesting because the results were actually leaked. And that was a lot of fun for us. So there's something called the V-binder, in which you can follow resolutions as they move through the various houses. And there was a resolution that then needed to be approved by the House of Deputies, which was essentially, we confirm so-and-so as the new presiding bishop. And someone had been editing that on the V-binder, and they put in Sean Rowe's name. And of course, some young adult immediately screenshotted that and shared it with everyone at the entire convention. So it was very fun for us. And our immediate impression, I think, of the presiding bishop-elect was just, he's very pragmatic. He immediately came up and sort of no nonsense said, we are going to do the work of restructuring the church, of investing in local congregations, in dioceses, and he really gave the impression that he was going to be on the ground doing this work alongside us. Yeah.
I'll echo Teagan's sentiments about feeling fortunate to be able to witness a presiding bishop election during our first time at General Convention. And I'll also note that the young adults had the opportunity to gather for a question and answer session with presiding Bishop Curry, which was one of the highlights of my time at General Convention, because when I joined the Episcopal Church as a high schooler, he was really a figure that I looked up to as sort of the leader of the Episcopal Church and someone that was preaching a message of love and really, I think, challenging my idea of what it means to be a Christian, what it means to be an Episcopalian, and what church looks like. So I was happy to sort of have the opportunity to meet with him in a more intimate setting and hear what he had to say about his time in that role, and really look back on the past several years and witness the transition and I think hopefulness about this new chapter for the Episcopal Church. My impression of presiding Bishop-elect Rowe's presentation to the convention was that, again, he was very pragmatic, I think decisive and level-headed, but also I think energetic and hopeful. And I think that's a good balance to have in a presiding bishop.
Well, and one small thing I'll add is that the presiding bishop-elect is actually the youngest presiding bishop we've ever had at 49. He was also the youngest bishop at 32, and then the youngest Episcopal priest at the time at 24, which I did the math, and I'm not even sure how he did that. Because he must have graduated high school at 17 or something and just tore through it. But that was exciting for us in the Young Adult Festival to see that kind of representation as well.
So there were a lot of, did you have something to add, Dean?
Well, I was just going to say the leaked election, we have a tradition of that. The last election, when Michael Curry was elected, one bishop, in his enthusiasm, violated the protocols and thought he was just sending a little text to only one person. And of course, that didn't last very long. And we actually there were disciplinary procedures for this bishop so that would not happen again. So I got a kick out of the fact that they were so anxious about us having cell phones, using cell phones, and then of course, it gets leaked. So, but no real harm being done.
Well, they're very different styles of people, right? Bishop Curry and
yeah,
Bishop
we're gonna miss Bishop Curry, but we're going to, I think, appreciate what Bishop Rowe brings to the table. He's not Michael, and this moment, I think, calls for someone different.
So, in addition to voting on the next presiding bishop and the president of the House of Deputies, which we can talk about too if you'd like, but there were a whole slew of resolutions that came before the delegates, a whole range of topics, ranging from liturgy to political issues to international issues, and those votes were reflective of, I think, an Anglican way of addressing some of the more contentious issues of our day, in some cases, finding a middle way. Others were very kind of clear in their conviction on sort of one side or the other. We should mention that in light of the shooting in Pennsylvania last night, the church has had a lot to say about gun violence, and I think Dean will speak to that as well in his sermon this morning. But the church, what is it that, so the church passes all of these resolutions. What does that mean for our ability to speak to these issues? How can the church speak to these issues? And what do you all also, I'd like to hear, Dean, from your perspective in leadership, but also from you two as well.
Well, somebody asked me, so what difference does General Convention make? And, it's a legitimate question. It's a very expensive, quite expensive and extensive gathering. And it's sort of like sitting in Congress and saying, what does Congress ever do? And maybe you'd listen for days and not hear anything that seemed interesting or anything that would pertain to you. And then suddenly something comes up that's really important for your life, for the things that you value. And I would say that convention is like that. There was the House of Deputies, I like to say, is the accelerator. They are usually only there for one or two sessions of General Convention. Some are there longer, but they have a limited time to make their impact, so they want to see things happen now. The House of Bishops are the brakes. They very often will say, well, we see your point on that, but we would like the wording to be a little more modified. And we saw that in the Gaza resolutions. Nobody in the, I wouldn't say no one, few people in the House of Bishops wanted to use the word genocide to describe what's happening in Gaza. And so, that's a technical question, it's an emotional question, but in general, I think the House of Bishops didn't want to bring a gas can to a house fire. So that was part of that.
And yet spoke forcefully in the resolution using different words, right?
Yes.
About that situation.
Yes.
Well, it was great for us as a part of the Young Adult Festival. They really walked us through how resolutions move through the houses, which is required, right? Because it's confusing, or it can be confusing. And the leadership would take us, and we would go and sit in on various sessions. So we really got to see some of these resolutions move through the legislative committees first, which are, called together, I believe, by the president of the House of Deputies, and they're lay and ordained folks in there, and they really are the ones, in many instances, who are drafting these initial resolutions, and then deciding whether or not they will be considered by either of the houses. And we got to sit in on some of those legislative committee sessions. We got to sit in on the floor in the gallery of the House of Deputies and the House of Bishops and hear some of the debate. It really seemed to me, particularly with some of the resolutions that were complex and difficult topics, that what convention provides is a platform for us as a church to prayerfully consider these questions in a public forum so that everyone can contribute, everyone can technically give testimony, because you can come to the legislative committee hearings and give testimony. You just have to announce yourself 30 minutes prior. And that can really make a big difference. I saw powerful testimony given on a lot of subjects. And so for me, it was just special to see the behind the scenes, how everything works, and just that opportunity to discuss openly is so important. We need to be able to have conversation.
As Episcopalians, our baptismal covenant calls us to strive for justice and peace among all people, and I think that's a lofty goal, but General Convention is one of the times where we can meet for mutual discernment about what justice and peace looks like, because different people have different ideas about what justice is because of their lived experiences and their identities. So I think being there and being able to witness civil and respectful debate among people who disagree was, for me, comforting and inspiring at a time where I don't always see that in national politics, particularly in the US. So I feel hopeful about being part of a church where those discussions can happen in an earnest and respectful way.
I want to invite questions from the people in the room. If you're in the room and you have a question, just raise your hand. Conrad Tinney has question cards, and he'll bring them to you. And if you're joining us online, you can post your questions in the chat, or you can email me at mward@stbarts.org, and we'll get your questions to our panelists. And in the meantime, while we're waiting for those questions to come in, I'm wondering if you could each name one or two things that excited you about the future of the church that you left the convention with.
Well, one thing.
I'll give to this. There you go. There you go.
There we go. One thing I would mention is the worship in General Convention is extraordinary, and as diverse as our church. So things are done in different languages, and we sometimes forget that everything that is discussed in the House of Bishops and the House of Deputies is being translated into Mandarin, Spanish, sign language, French, Creole. So there's a international quality to the experience that reminds you that the future of our church is a diverse one.
One of my major takeaways, going back to the interconnectedness of the church and how it feels like a small world at times, The revival that they had, which was sort of the last big opportunity for presiding Bishop Michael Curry to preach.
We had big presence at the revival.
Exactly.
Stephanie Spellers was a part of leading that. So was Zach Nain.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So they were up on the stage. They helped to plan the revival. Our very own little bookstore here, we carry Thistle Farm products. And in the course of the revival, there was a process of anointing folks. And the oil for that anointing actually came from our bookstore. Because Zach planned it, and he said, "Hey, Teagan, can you get me some of the oil?" And so I brought it, and I did some of the anointing. So it was just like a very full circle moment. And they did such a great job there. But it was fascinating for me to see the impact that St. Bart's has on a national scale. That was something that I maybe intuited a little, but I didn't quite understand until I was walking around the convention floor with my St. Bart's tote bag, and people would flag me down and would say, "Oh, do you go to St. Bart's?" I kid you not, I had one person approach me and say, "I recognize you from the forum that you did on discernment at St. Bart's. My priest sent it to me." I met someone from Hawaii who asked what church I attended, and I said St. Bart's, and he said, "Well, how interesting, because I run the social media for my church in Hawaii, and we follow St. Bart's for inspiration." And I kept having those kinds of little interactions, and that was really powerful for me to see that our ministry here really matters, and this witness is important around the nation.
Yeah, I said something about this, and it sounds very immodest, but it's very satisfying to go to a large church convention and have people from all over know about your ministry, follow your ministry, admire what you're doing, find inspiration in it. There's a lot of that, and I've tried to say that our associate clergy are well known.
Like Dean, I appreciated the diversity of worship. The morning of the presiding bishop election, we had a Eucharist at 8:30, and it was divided up into sections so that some parts of the service were in English, some in Spanish, and some in French. And then folks said the Lord's Prayer in their native tongues, or they signed it in American Sign Language. And that just felt a little bit like Pentecost to me. It was just spiritually a beautiful experience. And then I've also never seen so many chalices on one table. I'm not really sure how logistically that worked. They have a great altar guild team there. But it was after the service, the choir kept singing and the band kept playing, and people who didn't immediately have to go to legislative sessions stayed there, and we were dancing, and it was just joyful and fun, and it gave me a lot of hope, and it got me excited to go to seminary and continue engaging in this work.
We'll beat that out of you. No, I'm sorry. I apologize.
Oh, my goodness. That's what bishops are for.
I know. No, it's all true, and one of the things that I can say, having done this for a while, the enthusiasm of young people continues to repopulate the church. Young people come in, they don't know what we can't do. They haven't been disappointed or had their dreams stepped on, and so it's a wonderful kind of thing to be inspired by them.
Yeah, and Dean's joking comment sort of leads me to my next question, which is, what was there anything that confused you or frustrated you in the process of General Convention?
Well, when we got a visit from the president of the House of Deputies, we had an opportunity for a really candid conversation about sort of the way that General Convention is structured, and that was illuminating. And one of the questions that I asked was, who's paid to be at convention. And the clergy certainly are. A small selection of lay people are, but really, for the most part, the bulk of the work that's done in the House of Deputies is done by volunteers who are sacrificing, in some instances, a lot of their vacation time, a lot of financial resources to be there and do this important work of helping the church to determine where God is calling us. And I would love to see some way of helping to support lay people in their ministry, particularly around General Convention.
Well, and one of the questions has been, who can possibly be a deputy? Who has a job that will allow you to take 2 weeks off or 10 days or however long the convention is and be fully committed to that? It tends to be sort of a self-sorting collection of people, and that means we don't get the diversity that we continue to look for in terms of socioeconomic diversity, for example, or age diversity, because the head of a law firm can say, I'm going to be gone for a couple of weeks, and everybody says, yes, sir. Younger people don't have that opportunity.
Not to mention, people with families. There is childcare at General Convention, but it's not necessarily an option for every family. But I think in light of all of this, we were particularly appreciative of St. Bart's sending us, and it was just such a great opportunity for us to do.
Yeah, and that I should add that I'm reminded by one of our viewers that there is the House of Bishops, there is the House of Deputies, those are deputies who are elected, and then there are delegates, which is a whole separate category of person who are elected by the Diocese of New York, elected our own delegates and alternate delegates to go down to General Convention, and they vote as well, and they participate as well. So if I misspoke earlier, I apologize. Thank you. Okay. We have a question about the presiding bishop-elect, and it kind of goes to also something that I think came up at the convention, which is what does the church need to let go of in order to grow, or in order for resurrection in the church to happen? And this question from one of our people in the room is, what might you expect the new presiding bishop to do in consolidating or reviving the church? So we could answer, I invite your answers from the point of view of what can the presiding bishop do, and what are your thoughts about what the church can let go of?
Well, I would say, like American presidents, presiding bishops have limited powers. And so we will all be expecting these great things, and then we will find that the presiding bishop and others will come up against systems that are pretty entrenched, and it's not simple to revolutionize a big old church institution. So it'll be interesting to see how that takes place. It will take not only the willingness of the presiding bishop, but the willingness of the lay leaders of the church, the other clergy leaders in the church. This will have to be a movement across all orders of ministry. Yeah.
Well, we spoke earlier about the presiding bishop-elect's pragmatism, and one great example of that is the announcement that he made about his installation. I think that is one meaningful way that the presiding bishop can sort of set the tone for the rest of the church. So I don't know if you guys saw this, but the presiding bishop will not be having the usual installation at the cathedral in Washington, D.C., but has opted to have a smaller live stream ceremony actually at 8:15 here in New York. So really at the place where the business of the church happens. And, his explanation was, we're going to cut back on carbon emissions and we're going to save some money. I don't need a big party, essentially. And while I think this is a cause for disappointment in some folks, I think others really appreciate that Bishop Rowe is already thinking about what ways he can have his ministry lessen the impact on our environment, lessen the financial impact, and I think it sends a message. It sets a tone.
And he did that right out of the box, and so that's the kind of thoughtful, strategic thinking that I will expect from Sean, I think. He's a very thoughtful, quiet, not flashy, person who I think has a clear vision.
And who I think has the institutional know-how. He's the parliamentarian for our current presiding bishop, which essentially means he's the person who sits next to him and whispers in his ear if he's following the correct legal procedures for convention. So he knows his stuff, I think.
Is there a way that the presiding bishop's decisions and administration will trickle down to the parish level and affect our work here at St. Bart's?
Well,
it depends.
we hope. Here's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a movement that says we're going to go from asking 15% apportionment of the diocese to 10%. And we're going to invite dioceses to reduce the apportionment to parishes, and we're going to invite parishes and dioceses to spend more of those resources at the local level. That would be something meaningful that would have real impact, and people would see it and feel it right away.
Yeah. Another question from someone in the room. How did your experience at General Convention equip and or energize you for continued service in the Episcopal Church?
Personally, I think it helped me to recognize the privilege of having worked at St. Bart's in a lay capacity before going to seminary, and also just the privilege inherent in being a member of the St. Bart's community. As Teagan said, there were so many young people who don't have young adult groups in their own diocese and who rarely get to worship with people their own age, and that hasn't been my experience at all throughout my time in the Episcopal Church, so it was a bit of a culture shock to realize that. And so now I'm thinking about ways of connecting those young adults who feel maybe a little bit alienated in their parishes, because I feel to be the only young person in your church and to continue coming to church, I really respect that, and I think that's powerful, and that says something about the work that we're doing. But I'm thinking about ways to support those people and to help numbers of young adults in those dioceses grow.
Well, as most of you probably know, Bailey's going to seminary, which means that I get to do a lot of the things that she's currently doing, which includes newcomer welcome. And that's a part that I'm really excited about. Having experienced such a warm welcome in the Episcopal Church at St. Bart's, and then again at General Convention, where we're really invited into the mechanisms of how the church operates, and building those connections, it occurred to me while I was there in the room with all these young folks, we might know each other for the rest of our lives. We might continue to see each other at General Convention for the next 30, 40, 50 years. And that was kind of a mind-boggling realization to have, that these are partners in ministry, these are lifelong friends, and that's definitely something that I'm going to pray about, reflect on, and hopefully incorporate in my ministry here.
And I would just say there's nothing more invigorating than being with your peers and having them say nice things about the work that you're engaged in. I tried to say this in the announcements a couple of weeks ago, but it just was really very satisfying to get that feedback about St. Bart's and what it means to the wider church.
You mentioned, Bailey, the number of young people, or the lack thereof, in churches around the country. Did you hear any discussion about that more broadly, or in general, about the decline in participation at the parish level, even of people of any age, and how, and maybe Dean, you can speak to this as well, how parishes are recovering after the COVID era?
I think the Young Adult Festival in and of itself is meant to signify to young folks that they have a place in General Convention and that they have a place in the church and that the church cares about what they have to say. As I said, the Young Adult Festival began in 2003, so I think it's a fairly recent endeavor, but I do think that helps to energize people and to let young people in diocese with fewer young peers know that they're not alone and that the work they're doing might have fruition in the future.
When I was Bishop of Kansas, we had a number of small rural parishes that did not have very many or any younger adults. And so some churches only had a few members, like for a youth group. So a 3-person youth group isn't a lot of fun. But then you pulled people together across the whole diocese and you had 50 or 60 people. Now that can be a lot of fun. And the camping program also emerged out of that. So I think the Episcopal Church is kind of following that model, trying to create some places where if you get enough young people from across the denomination, you can see the beginnings of how you might do something with that.
I think having a critical mass is important, and allowing young people to discern how they want to show up for themselves in the church is important, because sometimes it's a little discouraging to just, even in places where there are more young people, to have older folks in the congregation say, oh, we need young people, like the church is dying. It's like, okay, operating consistently from a fear-based place is not, I think, necessarily what is going to invite more young people into the church.
Yeah, and apparently young people don't really need dating advice from older members of the congregation. I've observed that as unhelpful.
Or necessarily rock bands. I think that also tends to be an instinct that, like, if we have a live show, maybe young folks will come. But I think the virtual world that we live in now is also going to contribute to this, right? Because, we're in 4 or 5 group chats now, I think, with tons of young Episcopalians from around the country that we met at Young Adult Festival. There's a young adult caucus at General Convention that's actually led by Ava, who, is from St. Bart's. So that's amazing. And I think that this kind of energy spreads very easily. So folks who are in maybe isolated dioceses who came to Young Adult Festival can now find some support and structure in these virtual connections where we can pray for each other and talk about our experiences in ministry. And then they can invite in whoever they meet, and so on and so forth.
That's great. Well, I think we're just wrap up with one final question. We talked about what the church needs to let go of. We talked about the changes that may be afoot with our new presiding bishop and the potential changes in structure. From your experience, what would you say is 1 or 2 things that the church is already doing that we should lean into even more in the years ahead? Something that's feeding us, feeding our people, and really building the kingdom of God.
Well, just quickly, I would say that leaning into inclusion and diversity, that's going to, I think, be a winning strategy for us going forward. And the more we're able to do that, the better. And I think that leaning into, I like the term right sizing, that we're not necessarily cutting back or cutting down, but we're trying to find what the appropriate size is for our resources and our mission. That's going to happen in every place, every parish, every diocese, and across the Episcopal Church.
I think one of the major things that people interested in finding a church home in the Episcopal Church look to is what is the social justice work that's being done in that parish? What matters so much to these people of faith that they'll take action and try to bring about some change in the world? And I think this is something that attracted me to this church. I am an alum of the Episcopal Service Corps right here in New York, the New York Service and Justice Collaborative. And if that hadn't been emphasized to that degree, I don't think that I would have been as attracted to it. But I also know that this work has to be rooted in contemplative stillness and prayer, and that only from that place of stillness within yourself can you really make meaningful social change in the world. And I think that that's something that's really elevated in the Episcopal Church, and I hope to see it continue.
I'd say increasing accessibility by using some of the same tools that I saw at General Convention, be that multilingual worship, be that ASL interpreters, or be that, as Teagan said, virtual access and virtual communication between Episcopalians. I think I'd like to continue seeing that in the church.
That's great. Please join me in thanking our panelists this morning. Thanks for being here. You know where to find our panelists if you have other questions that weren't asked during our session. And join us next Sunday. We will be welcoming Bishop Trevor Mwamba, who is the former Bishop of Botswana. And he will be joining us to share his experiences of his ministry as bishop and now as a politician. So please join us. We'll see you then.